This is Lou, A Common Sense Patriot, and we're going to expand today on our Shame on Us series, which is an examination and exposure of so many things we have allowed to insidiously creep into our culture or disappear from our culture, neither of which should ever be acceptable. And yet, for some reason, we turn a blind eye to them. Now, I'm working on shortening the overall length of A Common Sense Patriot videos. Therefore, I'll only add 3 more to the list today. So this is numbers 6, 7, and 8, and is Shame on Us, Part 2. Number 6. Can anyone explain the logic, or even absent logic, any good reason, or absent a good reason, even a bad reason, that biological males should be allowed to compete athletically against women in women's sporting events? Now, I'm not talking about a co-ed softball game or a mixed doubles tennis match. I'm talking about males competing in all-female sporting events like track and field, or soccer, or swimming, or tennis, etc. And they get to do this because the guy, or or whatever these people call themselves, feels girly today. They got 17-inch biceps and 23-inch thighs, and they're 6'3" and 220, but they're just really identifying with their femininity. Really? How is that fair to the biological females? This is happening all over, and yet I don't personally know a single person who supports it. Do you? Seriously, I'm really asking you to think about that. Many, if not most of us, know not a soul that is on board with that thinking, and yet somehow it has become a thing. Ask yourselves how that happened. Who drove that into being when almost no one agrees that it should be? Shame on us for allowing that. Number 7. Have you ever stopped to think about how insane it is that we are willing to click accept virtually every time we download an app or install some new software or enter into an online agreement for a new service or whatever, yet we never read the 43 pages of fine print lawyer bullshit we just agreed to accept? Yeah, I know we've all paused at some point before clicking accept, wondering, quite rightly, what it is exactly that we're agreeing to, but then we cave and do it anyway. Why? Because we just don't want to take the time to read 43 pages of stuff that is so convoluted and legalese, 95% of us wouldn't understand it anyway. Maybe the more important question to ask is why we let our system protect the entity asking us to accept their fine print, knowing we won't read it, that leaves we the people hanging out to dry. Why have we just let this continue, fully knowing that we're routinely signing away rights and privileges we'd be much better served to keep, a significant portion of which pertain to our personal privacy or ability to retain some position to push back on what was contained in that 43 pages of crap we agreed to without reading? Lawyers know almost no one will ever read the fine print or understand it, even if they do. So they hide things in there that we'd be appalled at. Shame on us for allowing that. Number 8, borders. We have them, as does, to my knowledge, every other country on earth. Also, to my knowledge, all of the other countries around the globe enforce their border regulations. Why? Well, probably the most simple and profound reason is that a country with no borders just isn't really a sovereign nation. Now, is it? So what if a country technically has defined borders but doesn't enforce them? What do you call that country? Well, that's easy. You call that country the United States. And isn't it interesting that our neighbor to the south, Mexico, from which comes a huge percentage of the illegal immigration to the U.S., has what my research tells me is the 8th most stringent immigration laws in the world. How's that for irony? Can any of y'all out there tell me why it makes sense for me, or benefits me, just an average American Joe, to have open borders? Seriously, I'm interested in hearing the long-term benefit to me, a born and raised here U.S. citizen, of unbridled immigration into my country. Also, while you're at it, please continue that explanation so I can also understand how the U.S. having basically open borders benefits my children and their children and my posterity on down the line long after I'm dead and buried. Honestly, I'm truly interested in someone having a good explanation because I've never heard one yet. History has shown us that unchecked immigration just never ends up doing anything in the long run but eroding and eventually destroying the original national culture and productivity. Just ask the ancient Romans, for example. It makes the population of the original country lazy and entitled because through the generations, more and more kids grow up thinking that the jobs where you get your hands dirty and you have to take a shower when you get home from work to wash the dried sweat off are for immigrants or people of color or unintelligent people. Gee, I thought back in the 1860s we fought a war to abolish slavery here in the United States. Are there some of you that feel better now because instead of some white slave ship captain buying captured black African folks on the west coast of Africa from another black African who caught and is now selling them, our slaves are simply allowed to freely but illegally cross our border into slavery? Does that feel better? Really? Instead of black people picking crops now, it's brown people, because our slaves come from south of the border now as opposed to Africa. And instead of the black house slaves cleaning the homes of the wealthy, it's brown housekeepers. Instead of black folks working in the kitchens at restaurants and cleaning hotel rooms, it's brown folks. Instead of the physical manual labor jobs being mostly black in America, it's changing now to be mostly brown. And instead of feeding them and clothing them and putting them in bad living quarters like the owners of African slaves did of the 16, 17, and 1800s, today's slaves get paid a wage to barely feed themselves and clothe themselves and put a roof over their heads. Of course, there are differences between then and now, but there is also much that isn't very different at all. So once again, tell me how that is better over time for our country than having solid border control and having our children grow up less entitled and more familiar with manual labor jobs and hard work in general, and less familiar with sitting on the couch and killing zombies on their laptop all day, and less familiar with expecting someone else to provide for them. Why don't we refamiliarize Americans with hard work and personal responsibility and instill in our citizens that all people of all colors are God's creation and to be respected, instead of letting these poor people come to our country illegally, where they will get the types of low-paying jobs that will ensure that no matter how woke you think you are, you will still think of yourself as being better than them. And they will still be second-class people in your eyes. It's a baited trap for them, which is so tragic for them. And it keeps us dependent upon the cheap labor they provide. Not to mention, it keeps replenishing a voting bloc for the left. We need to plug the hole and let the recalibration of our own society and economy and job market begin. Yeah, it'll be a little rough for a few years as we get used to being self-reliant again. But in the long term, it will be much better for we, the people. It will be much better for our young people to learn to mow the lawn again and clean the pool and work construction and work at Jack in the Box. We need the jobs our kids do in high school and during the summers, and that folks who are less motivated to climb the socioeconomic ladder but are still motivated to make their own way in society be those jobs that our illegal and tragically enslaved brown brothers and sisters do now. Now, do some illegal immigrants succeed in overcoming the obstacles and rising in the socioeconomic demographic? Yeah, of course they do. And you can also find folks of all birth nationalities, races, colors, religions, genders, shapes, and sizes who have succeeded here in the land of the free. But the point, once again, is how do American citizens and their families for generations to come benefit from open borders? The answer, folks, is we don't. We lose in the long run. And shame on us for allowing that. Well, hopefully that will provide you all with some food for thought. And when I ask you to think about something or respond, I'm being serious. I'm very interested and certainly willing to learn something new. Also, if you find these videos interesting or worth sharing, please do. I'd appreciate a more diverse audience to hear responses from. I'm Lou, A Common Sense Patriot. Godspeed.